Night Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, to secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Renee Barnett.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Night Vision. Welcome to my Friday night. Every Friday night, this is what I enjoy doing after a rough work week. And so I hope we can all relax here together, although I don't know how relaxing it's going to be because we're going to be talking about weird things. We're going to be talking about bad houses. Can a house just be bad? Are there houses that are just cursed or have something inherently wrong with them? You know, we've seen big films like, The Conjuring, with the Conjuring house. Of course, we're all very familiar with that. Especially one of my guests that is coming on right away. And also like the Amityville Horror House that, there have been big blockbuster movies made about, but they were based on true stories. Now, of course, Hollywood got hold of them and did their thing, but anyhow, it's, oh, good. I just saw one of our guests arrive. We've been having a little technical problem. I'm so happy. But anyhow, I want to just cut to the chase right away and bring on my first guest because he's a colleague of mine and he is one of the best paranormal investigators that I know of. And he is KGRA's own Ken DeCosta. He's the host of Dead Air and he's my pal. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Renee. It's Friday night. I'm here.
Yeah. What else am I going to be doing on a Friday night?
Yeah, you and me both. But thank you for having me.
This is my biggie for the week.
Right.
So,
this should be interesting tonight.
Yeah. I know we talked a little bit about it before the show earlier in the week when I thought about it. But what was interesting was it last week? It was the week before last. I had an author, Daniel Duke, on, and he was the great grandson of Jesse James, and we got to talking about that whole story, the Jesse James treasures that are supposed to be buried here and there, and also we got into a little bit of paranormal stuff that he had experienced while looking for this treasure and while dealing with some of the old documents and things, and it reminded me of a story from my childhood, or I guess it was around middle school when this happened, and there was our outlaw hero where we grew up was Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen, and of course that was especially fun for girls, because we didn't have that many outlaws, but. Yeah, I mean, even my parents took me over to the grave of Belle Starr when I was, 6 or 7 years old. It was in a little town called Briartown, Oklahoma, which is not far away.
I don't know about role models, but
yeah, exactly.
Nonetheless,
exactly. But yeah, she was quite a character, that lady. Mm-hmm. But it was funny because I remember this story of when in middle school and these two boys had gone out and they were looking for Belle Starr's treasure. And there was this old shack outside of town that was supposed to have been a stopover for her. And supposedly some treasure was buried there. And they went out there and they were looking for the treasure. And they looked up and they said they saw Belle Starr sitting on the porch of this old ramshackle house in a rocking chair reading the Bible. And so they took off, ran to their pickup truck and started down the road and looked, and she was sitting between them. And they were so frightened, the story went that they, went to the parents took them to the hospital, to the doctor. And then forever after, it was two brothers, you could drive by their house any time of night and it'd be fully lit up. And so I thought, I was wondering, was I really remembering that story right? So I called my friend, who was my best friend from like birth through high school. We were born apart, delivered by the same doctor. Her mom checked out the day my mom checked in, and they stayed in the same hospital room. So it was, we've known each other that long. So I called her and said, do you remember that story? Because I couldn't remember the boys' names. And she remembered. I won't say it on the air, just in case they might be listening. And but she said, yeah, that was true. And then she was reading the Bible, and she was sitting between them in the truck. And then we started talking about weird things and haunted houses. And, she reminded me that she lived in this house. It's a beautiful home in a historic area of Oklahoma City. But they bought it when it was just ramshackle. It hadn't been lived in. It had been vacant for decades, literally decades. And it was the home of this old judge, I believe. I'm going to let her tell the story. But they moved in, or they fixed it all up, made it really nice. I mean, it was a very nice area. Her husband was a prominent lawyer there in Oklahoma City. She was a city councilwoman there in Oklahoma City, and very nice neighborhood. But after they moved in, bad thing, horrible thing, ridiculous thing after another happened to them. I mean, from really bad crimes committed on their property. And I'm not going to get into detail because I don't want to ruin the story. But it was funny because we were talking about it the other day. And I said, you know what I was thinking about your house? I said, it reminds me of The Shining, because her husband, God rest his soul, loved that house. He wouldn't leave that house, but yet he deteriorated in that house. It reminded me so much of Jack Nicholson. And I did ask Anne beforehand if there was anything I shouldn't talk about. She says, I have nothing to hide, everything you disclose. So yeah, it was really bad. So bad that, when they left that house finally and it was sitting vacant again, he would come back. They would find him in the middle of the night. He would walk from across town. They'd find him asleep on the floor of that. It was like that house had a hold on him. But anyway, without further delay, if it's okay with you, Ken, I'm going to introduce Anne Simank. Hey.
Hi, Anne.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank God.
Hi, Renee, and nice to meet you, Ken.
Yeah, pleasure's mine. Nice to meet you too, Anne.
Thank you.
And I will tell you, there are some things that I will not allow you to disclose because we might both end up in jail. But we were the terror of the town. And we grew up in a very small town, and we were bored to death. And so we got into all kinds of mischief, and our reputation lives on to this day.
Here they come. That's what they say. Here they come again.
I know.
Well, Renee, thank you for inviting me to the show. The house, Ken, was, as she said, in a beautiful district. All the homes in that neighborhood had been restored, and nice families lived in them. But when we bought the house, our friends said, you must be crazy. That house had been built in 1925 during the Roaring '20s, and that attorney or judge that had the house built for he and his wife in 1925 apparently had quite a reputation for Roaring '20 parties and fast living and this and that. And so the house had a lot of history there that a neighbor across the street told me about. She was 90 years old, and she had known the original owner. After that original owner and his wife were no longer in the house, it did sit empty for years and years because the real estate investors had purchased it, and they just let it stay empty. So it had broken windows and vagrants in and out of it and trash everywhere when we bought it. And people said, "You're crazy for buying that house." It kind of the haunted house of the block. It was a problem house. And my husband was an attorney. He thought it was so cool that in 1925, another attorney had the house and he wanted to bring it back to the standard that it had been originally. So we started keeping a lot of the original chandeliers and a lot of the 1925 brass doorknobs and trying to rebrass them and fix it up. But then we also gutted a lot in the house and did some modernization type carpentry to it to make it look as a nice home that we wanted. And shortly after that, probably we had been in the home a year or so when we finished our renovations, all kinds of crazy things started happening to us. I was at that time just a mom of young children. My children were 2 and 4 years old when we moved in. And I would take them to Mother's Day out and I would go grocery shopping. And I came home one day and my next door neighbor had shot a man on the back doorstep of my house. He said he was trying to break in and my next door neighbor shot him with a gun. The police were there. That was one of the first things that happened that was kind of unusual. After that, I would say we probably had 3 to 4 robberies where people would bust into our home and steal little things like the children's piggy banks or maybe an old TV set or whatever, a microwave.
Weird.
Some of those things happened several times. People busted into our house when we would be gone and just would track mud all through the house. Mm-hmm. Eventually, things geared up to where it wasn't just simple little robberies of small things, but my dogs were poisoned with antifreeze. And I came home one evening and they were both dead in the fenced backyard. And then another day I was in the house alone and I had all the deadbolts locked and I was in the kitchen and I could see into the living room and I saw a man with a black hood, like a ski mask on and black gloves. And I screamed and he stopped and looked at me and I ran out the back door. I was right by the kitchen laundry room door and I ran across the street for help. And of course, when the police came, he was not in my house.
Do you think that was real or do you think that could have been?
Oh, it was so real to me.
Yeah, well, yeah.
How long had you lived there at that point, Ann?
I moved into that house in, I'm thinking 1980, and that probably happened 8 years later, but we had a series of all these other things happening.
Right. Were there other break-ins or robberies in the neighborhood that you were aware of?
No, and that was what was so crazy. That was not going on except at my house. And my house had been landscaped. It was beautiful now. We had finished our renovations. My house didn't look any different than any of the other houses. They were 3,000 square feet, 2 stories with a basement, beautiful old red brick historic home.
House.
Right.
I remember it.
And so, so I ran out of the house and they didn't find anyone in my house. They did find a little small pane of a true pane on a glass door. I don't know how a man's body could have gotten through it. And it was broken, but that's all they found.
Mm-hmm. So there was physical evidence of a break-in at that point.
Well, they didn't know that little square pane, the whole window, the whole door had panes all in it. It probably was like 12 by 6. I mean, the person couldn't get through. Small.
Right. Could he have reached through and opened the door through it, or?
It was on the floor. So the doorknob was high. There was no blood. There was nothing. Mm-hmm. So they didn't find anything. Right. as this went on, and I can't, there's so many things that happened there. It's just so hard to remember. But after the ski mask incident, that man in my living room that they didn't find, I think the next thing that happened was the attack. I was physically attacked, and it was dusky dark, and my son was upstairs. He was about 11 years old, and my daughter was gone. She was 2 years older, and she was in Colorado on a ski trip with friends. And it was spring break, and my husband was at his law office a couple of blocks away, and I told my son I was going to run to the grocery store real quick. It was about 7:30 at night. It was getting dusky dark. And I went outside, and someone from behind grabbed me with a glove on and put their hand over my mouth and put a knife at my throat. I was very calm and walked with this person to the backyard into the grass, and I got the glove down and very calmly said, please just don't hurt me. And he started stabbing, and he stabbed me several times. I fought, I screamed, we rolled around. Somehow when we came face to face and he was stabbing in my chest area, he just dropped the knife and quit his frenzy and ran off. Mm-hmm. And I ran the other way and ran across the street to the neighbors for help. Anyway, he didn't run completely off because he came back to my backyard, and my son had heard the screaming, and my son was chased by him. And the police came, and my husband came, and anyway, he was arrested and convicted. Mm. After that, I asked the police chief, what in the world makes my house have all of these things that happen? And he said he just didn't know. So I hired a professional landscaper. I put ADT alarm in my house, and I hired a landscaper and I lit that house up like Las Vegas. I had lights everywhere, all around the house. And it was a large 2-story with about a 5-foot overhang. And I had lights way up on the second floor, hanging down all over the yard. And mm-hmm. and eventually I moved out of there. My husband didn't want to move out, and he was going downhill quickly through all of this, and was drinking all the time, just like old Judge Moss used to.
Or like Jack Nicholson in The Shining.
He wouldn't move. So we stayed married, but I moved to another home, and he stayed in that house alone. And he fell, and he
fell down the stairs, didn't he?
He fell down the stairs. And those stairs, built in 1925, didn't curve. They were straight and steep. And he rolled down the stairs. We found him in there a couple of days later, took him to ER. It was after that that I had to become his power of attorney. And then I moved him out of there, and I locked the house up and let it stay empty for several years. I could not go back in there. I asked my children when I started to sell it a couple of 2 or 3 years later if they wanted it. They were grown by then, and they said no, they wouldn't have that house. They were scared to death of that house. My daughter swears she saw a lady on that stairwell, and she never told me that as a child, but she said she saw a figure of someone upstairs, and it scared her. Her bedroom was upstairs, and she faced her bed out to look at the backyard because she was afraid to look down the hallway toward the stairwell. So all of those things happened in that house. It was a beautiful home.
You used to hear like 1920s style music and things like that, like a party?
Dow, my husband, he was so enamored with that movie, The Shining, and he loved all of our old chandeliers. He thought that house reminded him of 1920s. He talked about he couldn't get over all the the bathtub champagne parties that the lawyer and his wife had in that house. He wouldn't let us throw away the clawfoot bathtub because I don't know if it was true or not, but he liked to think it was true. He talked about that house all the time. And then, like you said earlier, after I moved him out, after he had a tragic fall in there and I moved him out of that house, he would walk 3 or 4 miles through Oklahoma City at night, late at night, and I would find him in that house the next morning. Anyway, I finally sold the house, and no one in my family wanted it. So I don't blame them. I didn't want it
It'd be
either.
interesting to see if anything continued to happen after you were gone.
Well, after I was gone, it was empty, and
Yeah.
it just stayed locked up, and it deteriorated for a while, and finally I did go in there and gut it and try to get as much out of it as I could and sell it. And I have no idea because I've moved to Florida, and I feel good because I moved far away from all of this. I feel like I ran away from it.
Yeah. So,
Oh.
Ken, what do you think? Are you having any ideas?
Yeah, I was just actually making a couple of notes here as Ann was talking, like talking points. And it seems like there's a confluence of a couple of things here. One is stigma put on the property because before you bought it, the windows were broken and it was considered, I'm sure, by a lot of people an abandoned house. I don't know if there were ever any people living in it or anything like that. You probably don't either. But a lot of times what happens in the pragmatic sense is that the house was abandoned and falling into disrepair for so long. When you came along, obviously it was looked upon locally as an abandoned old spooky house. You could break windows and vandalize the property when you came along, and obviously put a considerable amount of money in it to fix it up. So immediately the same lowlifes, suddenly figured, well, there's somebody there with money. And, because that already had the stigma of being an abandoned property, the fact that a family was living there really didn't make any difference because it already had that attached to it. So, you were probably considered an easy mark. On the other end of that, as far as, seeing anybody in the house, a woman on the stairs, there is a certain residue that stays behind properties. The best way I could explain it is that energies stay behind, positive and negative. In that particular house, if there was roaring 20s party, I'm sure people had a hell of a time. So that kind of positive sort of partying energy stays there. But then on the other side of the coin is kind of like the negative stuff. Just a house in disrepair is a certain beacon for that kind of negativity.
But also, like when you go in and start renovating, doesn't that sometimes stir up something?
It certainly is possible that someone who might be attached to the property out of a sense of ownership or responsibility might feel as though they still have a certain territorial right to it. Mm-hmm. So you're fixing it up, and we hear a lot of stories like that. Workmen, their tools are moved, and it's just more or less an expression of maybe not disapproval, but, in their minds, it's you didn't ask my permission for any of this. You're changing colors, you're changing structure, and I am the rightful owner of this place because we do carry those type of personalities onto the other side. But if you go into, you both were hellraisers, you say, right? So if you've ever walked into a bar and you just didn't feel right. There was nothing going on, but something was just off. And then 5 minutes later, a couple of guys start fighting in the corner, right? Somehow you had an innate sense that the energy, the vibe, whatever you want to call it, just wasn't right. And a lot of times structures, houses, different buildings can have that type of residual type of energy left behind by us, depending on what we used it for and, the type of activities that were there. So I think, Ann, it's kind of like a confluence of all of those things. In the real world, you were a target of people because, they thought that there was something there that they could get. And the idea that people didn't think much of the place already because of the condition it was in before you got there. And those two things together just seemed like they just pinned a target on you.
Yeah. The big thing that happened, the stabbing.
Yeah, that's terrible.
I hear what you're saying about, especially those earlier break-ins. The house could have already, maybe they were there before when it was derelict and or a house had a reputation or something.
Sure.
But that stabbing, it turns out that this was a kind of a young kid, very young man, and he was the son of her next door neighbor. So, and he had come to visit, right, Ann? He didn't live there. He had come.
No, he had been with his mother. He had a childhood history similar to Charlie Manson's. His mother was a drug addict, prostitute in another state, I think Carolina. And so he had been put in foster care from an early age. He had grown up without his father. His mother had been in prison, and he had been in state's custody. So he had turned of age. He had turned 18 years old, and North Carolina found the closest relative, and that was a house sitter next door. It wasn't the next door neighbor.
Oh, it wasn't the owner.
His son. It wasn't the owner. The owner's beautiful home had gone to their farm in northern Oklahoma and decided to retire out of the city, and they had a house sitter while their house was on the market. That house sitter was the father of that young man that had just turned of age, and North Carolina had released him from years of being in state's custody. And
Can you tell me that his mother was blonde?
Right.
Yeah. So maybe it might have been you triggered him with your blonde hair or.
Well, I mean, I think you were being observed, Dan, because obviously someone knew that it sounds like they knew you were alone and no one in the house was coming to your rescue. Your husband wasn't home. And it sounded like you were being observed. That he pretty much knew what was going on there. Maybe a car wasn't there or something. And
he did. You're right. Yeah. He had just been in the neighborhood about 3 weeks before he did this.
Mm-hmm.
And he would we found out later because he was arrested, he was convicted, and he did go to prison and serve his full term. He was never given parole, but they found out that he had asked people in the neighborhood about who drove the yellow Mercedes and whose bedroom was that, and he knew all the rooms in my house. And
sure.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, he asked me if my daughter, she was, like I said, she was on a ski trip 12 or 13 with her friends, and he had asked if she had a boyfriend and which bedroom was hers. He was intending to come into that house that night,
mm-hmm.
but I just happened to open the back door to go to the store and go out on the back porch, and he grabbed me, which I think saved my life.
He had to be right there, just lurking right there.
Profiling would probably tell you that he probably had a long rap sheet before,
Well,
starting with petty crimes, and then eventually they become emboldened, and it's not enough, and then the next step is grand larceny like that, and attempted murder is a little bit too much, but
What was he convicted of?
I, I've
there's
got
probably about 8 things.
it. I've got it in
Was it attempted murder?
keep all of this. I have all of the court records on it. Assault and battery with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, several things.
Right.
But they tried to send him to a minimum security facility, and he didn't work out there. He did something, I'm not sure what, and they put him back in maximum. And so he served every bit of his term. And then I was always notified about when he was released. And then he did enter someone else's home, and he did go back to prison again long after me. I mean, he probably has a long record now.
Sure.
But for some reason, my children and I all tied everything to this house. I mean, none of the other houses on this block, or even in the neighborhood for several blocks, had
And then
any.
after you moved into another house, you didn't have the same.
This happened over a period of, 15, 20 years.
Wow.
Continued to hit the house. The police chief couldn't even tell me why that house was targeted all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you think 20 years later, no one would remember that the house was ever vacant or derelict. It's pretty weird. But
people didn't respect the property. The funny thing is, if you have a property, and let's say it's abandoned, nobody's living in it, and it looks pretty pristine, maybe it's a little overgrown and everything like that, no one will really mess with it until the first person throws a rock and breaks the window. And then it's like a hall pass.
Yeah.
After that, for everybody to just do the same thing. And sometimes the nicer a property is, the less people will destroy it or damage it. Unfortunately, the nicer a property is, and there are probably some families that are living there, I'm assuming, that have been there for years and years and years, and you kind of came along as the newcomers. So, again, you get a little bit of a target on your back because they think you've taken something that's dilapidated, turned it into something remarkable and beautiful. So there's something of value in you people, your properties, your belongings, your furnishings, and it just was a cycle that never ended, and I'm so sorry that you went through that, Ann.
Gosh, yeah. I couldn't believe it when I heard about it the first time. It was just, what? That's incredible. Oh, I can't imagine the terror you must have been feeling. We were trying to keep it together.
We were always afraid to live there. I mean, even after the dogs were, several years before that stabbing, when the dogs were fed antifreeze, I worried that I might start my car and a car bomb go off. I mean, anybody that will murder a dog might murder a person too.
Yeah.
But my children were afraid of that house. We were afraid in that house.
Yeah.
Always.
And then after you left, you had no further problems, right?
That happened to me since I left that house.
Right.
And I stayed in the city in another home for several years, probably 15 or 20 more years before I moved to Florida. And nothing ever happened.
Right.
That's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think a place can just have bad energy? I guess that's could be what maybe you were talking about when you're talking about residue.
I mean, You would probably know better if there was some way to talk to the people who live there now, because obviously there's a gap between Anne and her husband's ownership, where the place
Right.
was abandoned, but it sounds like a very desirable place. So I couldn't say that there was any kind of paranormal stigmatism to it unless you would talk to the people now and say, hey, are you guys okay? Do you have some weird things going on? Because in Anne's case, it could have, it just could have been, a beacon for horrible people who wanted
Yeah.
to take advantage of them,
But it's just so weird how her husband was just unusually attached to that house. Even after he became so ill, he couldn't even take care of himself anymore. He would somehow get up in the middle of the night and walk across town, and they'd find him asleep on the floor because there was no furniture in there anymore or anything. He could not leave that house.
I hear that all the time. I've heard it from the last two owners of the farmhouse here in Rhode Island, in Harrisville, otherwise known as the Conjuring House. And I've heard this from other people too, that they purchased the property because it just spoke to them. For whatever reason it was. This is going back to the Perrins now, with Andrea Perrin and her family. In her mother's case, she just
that was in The Conjuring, the movie.
Yeah, she just had to have this house at all costs, even though they couldn't afford it. Mm-hmm. And what happens is the more work you put into something, the harder it is to give it up. When you put that much sweat equity and financial equity into any place, it's hard. And a lot of times your attachment becomes borderline obsession, and that's the gray area. It's like, I don't want to leave where I am, and I call this home.
Yeah.
But then there comes that obsession with a place to the point where you're working for it rather than it working for you.
Yeah.
So, sometimes people go down that rabbit hole.
Well, I think you're right, Ken. He definitely was obsessed with the house. He had this idea that this house was going to be what it had originally been.
Right.
He wanted to bring it back and restore it.
Mm-hmm.
He was always, excited because a lawyer had had it built back in 1925, and was all interested in that time period. And he just wanted that house. I don't know. That isn't.
Well, the thing that can happen, Anne, when you are restoring something like that, you can always wake up the echoes too.
Oh, yeah.
You certainly can, because we see that a lot over here with the Gilded Age Newport mansions we have in Rhode Island, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and there is a lot of activity in those places. We've been in some. We've talked to the staff there who really have no dog in the fight. They're not trying to look for ghosts, but just like these things happen to them. And a lot of times that's exactly the result of, trying to restore them back to their original luster, any house. And it's almost as though you are resurrecting the energies that are there, as well as you are the concrete and the brick and the wood and everything else. So it's not unusual, not unique at all.
That is so interesting.
I mean, I wondered whether or not, because he identified so much with the lawyer, the judge that built that home and everything, that, maybe that lawyer or judge, what was left of him there, started identifying with Anne's husband. So it was almost like, he wanted to recreate everything because, he had this thing about the fact that the guy was a judge or a lawyer, and so was he. So
Right.
it's almost like identified with the guy, you know.
Yeah, there becomes an almost intrinsic tie
Yeah.
there, and again, not to get too woo-woo about it, but any complete thought that we have is released into the ether, it becomes something physical. And this is why I guess those people who are legitimate psychics say that they can kind of pick these things out of thin air. I don't know. I'm as psychic as this computer mouse that I'm holding up. I don't have the gift. Other people will tell you differently, but that's fine. But you tap into those energies. You know, we all do. My example of going into a bar, you don't have to be psychic to just walk in and say there's something not right here.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we have that innate sense. So this is why, I mean, I would, you know, you go on, Ann, and you live your life, but, you know, a part of me would love to find out what's going on with the people in the house now. Maybe nothing,
Me too.
but you might get a surprise, like, you know, okay, we're not being robbed or anything, but, you know, there's some weird things going on here. You know, there's some noises that, you know, we attribute to being an old house, but, you know, and maybe not. But, you know, in the 50 or so years, I've heard a lot of stories and been to a lot of places. And it's a very familiar thing to me to hear people talk about this is going on where I live.
What were you going to say?
I would be interested to find out too. Maybe that's something I need to pursue. I can't even remember, you know, who bought that house. I sold it.
They may not still own it. It may be.
I had locked it up and left it empty for so long that I was just, you know, it's just hard for me to remember who I even sold it to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it'd be easy to find out who owns it, who owns the title, you know, who's on the title now.
Yeah.
That'd be easy to find those records. Just give me the address. I'll get it for you.
All right. I do that.
Not on the air.
Well, this is what's fascinating. This is why we do so much background on a property that someone invites us into.
Yes.
Because something's going on or whatever, you know, and we're trying to figure out rational explanations first and foremost, because that's the best possible outcome. You don't want anybody to be frightened in their own house if there's a rational explanation for something. But the background of a house, the history of places, to some people it's not important. To us in this particular organization we have, it's paramount to find out, you know, who the players are, so you can be more specific about it instead of just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall. We have an idea that this happened here, there was trauma, there was tragedy, there was dysfunction, there were all these things here.
No,
you
there
don't
may be
have
things that happen there that you don't know about.
Yeah, you don't have the benefit of knowing what went on in the 20s there, because if they had that kind of money, and back then in polite society, they didn't talk about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That would be front page news right now. It was all, you know, swept under the rug, whether it was divorce or affairs or whatever it was in polite society. They didn't talk about it that then. So God only knows what that house has seen before you even got there.
Well, and you know, my husband was so enamored with that. He focused on those people that built that house.
Right.
The little lady across the street from us was the only person on that whole block that had lived there and knew them. And she did tell us a little bit about them, that they had roaring 20 parties. They were kind of party people. And my husband was a big party person. These lawyers are sometimes like that.
And this would have been during Prohibition, correct?
Oh, maybe.
In 1925, I don't know. You know, I guess so.
There were probably a lot of illicit stuff going on around there, you know. And if everybody turned a blind eye to it, that means that they probably had some prominence and some pull with the
And I think,
police
and my husband loved to, he idealized that. He thought of that all the time. He
right,
talked about it, about that house. That house energized him in that way.
right.
He wanted that house to be back like the Roaring Twenties.
Wow.
You know, he talked about, you know, champagne parties in the bathtub. He talked about swinging off the chandeliers. And then
Yeah.
after The Shining, he was focusing on that. And I think it's just because in that movie, there was the section where Jack Nicholson's in the bar and it's all Roaring 20 people he's seeing,
Yeah.
you know, and so
That was so weird because the other day when Ann and I were talking, we were talking about the house and I said, it kind of reminds me of The Shining. And she said, he used to say that all the time.
he said it all the time. I couldn't believe Renee said that to me.
That's crazy.
That's
Because I just
how thought about
everybody
that.
else was scared to death, but he was like all energized, and it was a strange situation.
Well,
Sure.
obviously he had an ideal that he was striving for, and I don't know about champagne parties in the bathtubs and things like that, but it may have been deep down inside something unachievable for him, but that wasn't going to stop him, and I'm not psychoanalyzing anybody. I don't know your husband, but I'm just speaking in general terms where, you can't realize that and you always want what you can't have. Some people are like that.
Well, he was very self-destructive. He did.
He kind of attached to that time period, that he was fascinated by the 20s.
Right.
Sure.
It's like there's definitely something between him and that house.
Sure.
That's for sure.
Sure.
But now let me ask you this, Ken. I'm sure you know because you've done a lot of these investigations where you're talking about, looking back and seeing, who was in the house before. So that would be, if you look at the records for that property, you would be able to go all the way back on it, right? And to when
As far as the records
land
are,
was, and everything, because like at the Conjuring house, there seemed to be a lot of sort of geophysical aspects of that land that might have had some kind of telluric energy and the ley lines and all that stuff. It seemed like in the running water, it seemed like that might have had some effect. And I'm wondering what's on that property, what was on the property, what was it built on top of?
Mm-hmm.
It
was essentially farmland. And we went in there one day, did a geological survey. We didn't even go in the house. We took soil samples, rock samples, and all the things. But I think all of that can be said about New England in general. We're built on quartz and granite and limestone and all of these things that are piezoelectric conductors of energy. Naturally, there's nothing supernatural about it.
Exactly.
And then with as much running water as we have, we found what I believe to be, if you want to call them ley lines, in a grid on the property. And then just a few hundred feet down the road, you have a cutout of overhead power lines running through. So all of this energy kind of feeds into the environment, which might induce some kind of activity, if not spiritual, maybe it induces activity in us, in our own minds. But the history of this place and why it's so important, and I know that Andrea Perron wrote a trilogy, but we're finding out more and more about the place.
Even today, now.
Oh yeah, God, and what's happened is so many of the anecdotal stories that she was told by the old timers,
right.
Who, you know how stories are. They stretch and they get embellished and they grow. So if you're going to rely on anecdotes, sometimes it's just not the way it actually was. There was no witch who lived there. But yet on social media, all the kids on YouTube, they want to say they were possessed and they're going to go the witch, and there was no witch who ever lived there. There was none of that, you know. In our experiences there, the people who remain are very nice people, and they're very warm and welcoming, and the only thing they ask in return is speak respectfully as we're talking with each other. So I find a lot of these places are exactly that way, but fear sells. So
Well,
this is
what do you think that is new about the Conjuring House that is different? Just these new measurements and things, these
just names and dates. You know, people who allegedly killed themselves on the property did not kill themselves on the property. They did not hang themselves in the barn. They, you know, all of those things come to light. And I've always said the same thing. The parent story is the parent story. You know, I have no qualms about that. It's just that with the new ownership, Jacqueline Nunez, she is very much emphasizing the reality of the place and trying to get rid of that type of stigma. There's that word again, that draws these people in who want to, you know, kind of leverage the place for their own benefit, you know, by putting these things on YouTube and making these videos and, oh, we got possessed in the house. Oh, stop that.
So the new owner, she knows, or does she, that something is different about the place, special about the place, but yet she wants to like separate the wheat from the chaff and get the real history.
The place is very active, and it's been for us.
You don't need all that.
You don't need you don't need the other stuff. The place is active enough and fascinating and interesting enough without introducing all these other characters into it that a movie was made and people still hang on to that movie. They still want the doll and the witch.
And many movies. Was there 3 Conjuring movies? Conjuring House movies?
Well, there was one about the house, and now they have a franchise. But the original one about that house was actually filmed in North Carolina. It was a different house entirely. $500 million. You know, and they've had a lot of problems with people trespassing, literally walking on private property, looking in windows, just like they have a license to do it. But
exactly,
this is the kind of thing a movie will do.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's good to get down to brass tacks and figure out what's really going on and what's not going on, and what's, you know, just being embellished. But yeah, that house is very, very unusual, and we'll have to do a road trip and go to this house and spend the night.
Yeah, we're fortunate enough. We're running an event there in February, and we've gotten to know the owner. And
that sounds like an invitation to me. I don't know about you, Ann.
I mean, but
I would go.
You know, but we'll go in there and take people in there and just, you know, continue our investigations and take people along so they can see what we do and how we go about our business. So we love it.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, you know, some people, and I think maybe even Albert Einstein was one of them, that said energies do not die. Mm-hmm. So our brain is energy, and that energy is going somewhere. So do you think in some of these houses that's from old energy, from all the old past people in the house?
Sure. Yeah. And the energy can neither be created nor destroyed. You know, there's potential energy, kinetic energy. But it goes back to, you know, my bar story where, that vibe still lingers. We leave our footprint They talk about carbon footprints, but we leave psychic footprints.
Yeah.
Everywhere we go, we leave our attitudes and moods and things like that. And this is why sometimes when people move into houses, what they call stigmatized property, where maybe there's been a murder or a haunting or something has happened in that house
Right.
prior to those people living there, which is why in some states you have to declare it, that this is a stigmatized property. In other states, they don't have to tell you unless you ask. The real estate agent is like, I want to see the history of the house. And it's not so much you're moving into a haunted house, but you're moving into a place that the potential to lose your privacy, because, it's haunted or there was a murder here, and people are so, with a lack of decency. Now they'll come right up, knock on your door. Hey, might we come in and look around the place? Excuse me, this is my home.
I'm in the shower.
Yeah, but this is what happens. And the first house in America where this happened was actually in New York City, and we visited this house in Nyack, New York. And I'm not gonna, with the whole story, anybody can look it up.
Yeah, we're down to the last minute, Ken. Just to let you know. And before we go, I want to thank both of you, my pals, and I couldn't have done it without you. And for those of you who are missing my colleague, James, I guarantee you I haven't killed him or don't have him locked up anywhere. He's actually still traveling. And I'm pretty sure he's going to be back next week. If he's not, he's going to be in big, big trouble. I know you miss his dulcet tones. So I will. Oh, speaking of dulcet tones, I got to hear some of Ken's new videos that you're doing.
Oh yeah, Extremely Strange on our YouTube channel, Dead Air.
Yeah. Check out Dead Air on KGRA. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.